Hi, my name is Jody Melton, and this is in regards to the case study, week 5. So the tentative plan based on our phone conversation, the first thing I would start to do through the phone conversation is just to establish rapport and trust. I would acknowledge the urgency and the empathy and follow up with clarifying questions on anything the client said during our phone conversation. Then I would also remind him that whenever he comes in, there would be an informed consent. So he would know if the areas or things that he shared is something that needs to be reported or action taken, or otherwise what is shared is confidential. And I would tell him up front that. So when he comes in as an individual, I would be asking questions. I would actively listen, not just to what the client is saying, but also his body language. I would assess if there's any potential harm to himself or others based on what he's feeling and how he is doing at that point. During that time, I would also ask him to identify some short-term and some long-term goals, as well as the reason for seeking counseling. And I would also acknowledge the mistrust and explore that area of mistrust that he has. But knowing that he has a history of PTSD would actually be so helpful. To me, it's so sad that he's gone so long without any help dealing with it. Understanding the client's PTSD is causing more struggles, for example, almost reaching the level of paranoia. And so while building trust and rapport in a safe place, we would also discuss those relationship concerns that he has. And my client has significant PTSD, and so he needs to be able to explore those triggers and the fears. But because the PTSD has been untreated, the client also needs to hear how when it's untreated, it can lead to more struggles. So we would also start to discuss a little bit of the functions of brain, just a little bit, so that he could at least hear. He may not fully understand in that moment, but he could hear how trauma truly does affect our brain's function. The ethical and legal side, the client, like I said, signs the consent, and so he knows if something is shared that needs to be reported or actions taken. Otherwise, it's confidential. But I would also have to really evaluate if the PTSD is how it's affecting his life. So is he safe? Is there a potential harm for anyone else? And then the practical suggestions that I would take in this specific side of the individual counseling would be providing a safe space. This client definitely needs that, the space to process. So he's reached out for help, and that's making a huge effort. And so because of what's happening in his world, that safe space is so important for him. I would also determine in this time how much the client is actually willing to change. So this client's going to be faced with some major decisions and action steps in order to take steps towards health and growth. And so the counselor, that would be me, needs to be able to assess to what level the client actually is willing to change. When it comes to the group counseling, the rules and expectations for the group should be reviewed before each group session. And so we would do that. I would acknowledge the emotions, and showing empathy for the group is a way to build trust and rapport, which I believe is critical for a group setting. We'd also discuss how the group, when they're fully engaged, tends to have lower conflict. And that's according to a journal article, and I'll reference the title, Changes in the Group Counseling Engagement and Conflict Growth in Emotional and Cultivating for Children and Adolescents. It's in the Journal of Counseling Psychology. Normalizing also the expressions of emotions and continuing to create that safe place for the group. The group will have similar emotions and feelings, and that's okay. So for my client that's his first time is in this group, we would not expect him or think that he should meet everyone right on the same vulnerability level that everybody else is, but be patient in him to get there. And so while he is struggling in this setting, crying, not being able to hold himself emotionally, we would let him kind of have that time, but then also offer some nonverbal cues as a way of support. The counselor, myself, would encourage everyone to continue to be honest and share when they can. And then that brief time of sharing and building rapport is a way to strengthen the group, and to help the group progress forward. And when the group is coming to an end, that session is coming to an end, I would wrap up the group by offering a snippet of the brain functions and the impact of PTSD. I'd probably even give out some educational crisis related information that can help the group throughout the week until we meet again, just with some practical steps they could do in order to maintain and walk healthy in a normal day life. And then I would also help the client, my client that was there for the first time, and everyone in the group to realize that they're not alone, that they have the same feelings and emotions, and they're processing things that everybody else is in their group is processing as well. So ethically and legally, I would again remind them that the confidentiality part in a group setting is so important. And so I cannot make them sign and hold them accountable to that. I can ask them to sign a confidentiality agreement, and trust that they'll do that, or make a verbal agreement in the group that they will do that every single time. So I would encourage it, and I would stress how valuable that part, the confidentiality is. That's a hard word to say. And then the practical suggestions, I would focus on the crisis. There is a major crisis for everyone in this group, and I would focus on that crisis, not letting things get sidetracked, but helping the group stay focused. And then also I would, every time we meet, I would give out information that empowers the people in the group, some education resources that they can help the individuals in the group take steps in making healthy progress. And then also, if they would like to schedule an individual session, we can do that as well, and they can approach me after the group. When it comes to the couple or the family setting, this was a tricky one, because the person that called to make the appointment is my client. And so I have to constantly remind myself, even though their partner is talking and leading more in the session, my client is the one that called and made that appointment. And so I need to remember that, and also help my client talk and communicate through that as well inside that session. I need to create a safe space for both my client and the partner. I would acknowledge how difficult the situation is, but I also need to assess whether or not the client and his partner still have feelings for each other. And so in that, I would validate the emotions that they're experiencing. I would express empathy for the pain that they're experiencing. But then also we would discuss the history of the PTSD with both my client and his partner. And even though there is tension in the partner's family, in one session, we cannot get to everything. And so I would focus on what needs to be done now. And so while the extended family is also part of the conversation, that would not be the focus today, in that first session. So I would establish who my client is and know that. We would discuss scheduling individual and sessions together as well, especially because my client is dealing with so much PTSD. And then the ethical and legal side with both my client and the partner. They would sign the consent forms, but then as the counselor, again, I have to know who my client is. And so while they're both in there, we need to have an agreement with both parties on the situation, not on the situation, but on who the client is and what some steps are. And then if those can't be maintained, if the nature of my role is conflicting with them two in the room, then we need to clarify, adjust, and potentially even if it doesn't work out, then we need to withdraw appropriately. This practical suggestions would be focused on what needs to be done immediately. While there's tension in the family, that's not something that we can address right away. We need to look at the relationship between my client and his partner. And then also look at the other suggestion that I would take with this and use is looking at the power and communication problems inside the family. So within the partner and my client, but then also look at the family as well. So that would be separate things that we would look at. When it comes to multicultural counseling, in multicultural counseling, you have to be able to address the differences um, between, know the differences between myself and my clients, but also create a place to where they still feel safe to share, even though there are maybe very major differences. So in this case, I'm a female and this is working with a male client. And so that's a big difference. So I need to understand that and consider and think through the different processes and the way that he is thinking versus sometimes the way a female is thinking. Then also, one of the other major aspects in multicultural counseling is the ability to listen without stereotyping, without judging, even though there are personal differences, maybe about beliefs or sexual orientation, religious beliefs, how a family should function, any of those differences. It is imperative that I put my opinions aside so that they do not interfere with the therapeutic process for my clients. And so I need to focus on what remains to be supporting. I can't be judgmental, and I need to continue that environment of fostering that environment of a safe place where they are allowed and feel safe enough to explore their unique differences and experiences and perspectives, where they can be heard and not judged. And so multicultural counseling in all three of these scenarios that we just discussed, the major thing is I cannot be judgmental and stereotyping. I have to be willing to look and continue to learn differences for people. Thanks.